Okay, let me catch my breath. Sorry about that. With 5 children, ages 18, 14, 6, 4, and 5, there's always a disaster going on behind me, and I don't know what happened. They were arguing with each other a while ago. So, going back to the question now.
Hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to become part of the Transplant Helper community.
Hello, Transplant Helper community. My name is Jim Burrow, and I'm just pausing for just a moment today to answer about 3 questions that were just sent in to me by a viewer, a friend of the program, someone I've actually been communicating with for several days now at length. And I just want to thank Tammy for sending these questions in, but I decided to do this in this form because I know there are many Tammys out there or people who have similar questions. Most of the questions, I should say all the questions that I'm going to present to you today or give answers to, I have answered before at length. So if I don't go into a whole lot of detail, I'll try my best to remember to put links in the description below with the full-length videos where I've covered these topics in the past. So with that being said, very first question here, and I'm looking down at my phone to read the question off. She says, I have a couple of questions. How was your quality of life after transplant? Well, that's pretty simple. My quality of life has enormously improved since transplant. Now, as I went through the whole, what turned out for me to be a lifelong process, but mainly a 7 or so year process of digression and, getting worse and worse and sicker, up to the point where I was sleeping about 16 to 18 hours a day, where I couldn't even take a shower without having to lay down and take a nap afterward, where I could not eat a meal. I almost never ate breakfast or lunch because I knew that as soon as I did, I'd be wiped out for the rest of the day. After going through all of that, pre-transplant, and particularly those last 10 months were horrible. That's one of the decisions that had to be made by my team as well as myself. In speaking of quality of life, because quality of life a lot of times is what matters. It's not always the numbers that they find in the labs. It's not the numbers they find in the testing facilities, caths and pulmonary tests and all that. Those numbers matter, but what matters most is how do you actually feel? Do you have a quality of life? Can you function? Or would you enjoy functioning the way that you are? And for me, the answer was absolutely not. I got to a place, and the doctors helped me to get to this place, or at least make the decision that I was at it. I got to a place where I knew I didn't want to live like that any longer. So if there was a potential to go ahead and get listed and hurry things up, and as I was listed all the way at the very top of the list, back then it was a status 1A. When I got to that listing status and all, I knew that this is the quality of life at that point was no good, and anything would probably be an improvement. Now, post-transplant, my quality of life has been much better. It was much better probably the day I woke up. I was blessed enough, lucky enough, whatever you want to call it, that I woke up within 45 minutes of surgery and actually convinced them, because I was trying to motion and do sign language and such, convinced them to go ahead and pull my breathing tube, my respirator, and I was off of that stuff very quickly, up in the chair and walking around within 24 hours, walking miles by the end of the week. So I had a pretty quick recovery as far as that goes. That wasn't a full recovery, but it was a recovery nonetheless, and that quality of life is so much better. Now, do I have ups and downs, good days, bad days? Yes, I've expressed that many, many times here on the program. I do, but that doesn't change the fact that overall, my quality of life, as you measure it relative to what it was to what it is so much different. And so I would suggest that for the vast majority, I'm making up this statistic, but for probably 90% or better people, you're going to have a much higher quality of life post-transplant than you ever did before. So that within itself makes the transplant process altogether worth it. So that's the first question. Second question, she asked and says, how was it, and she's talking about quality of life, I guess, how was it with your LVAD? Well, I think some wires have gotten crossed here. I have never personally had an LVAD. I've done several videos about the LVAD where I have kind of reviewed the LVAD. I've given suggestions on whether or not the LVAD is a good option, whether or not it's the way to go right now and all. And I suggest that with the current status listing system, which status listings now go numbers just 1 through 7, there's not any A's and B's and such, and the difficulty that's involved in getting to the top of the list and getting at least within the first 4, 3, 2, 1 tiers in order to be transplanted within a relatively short time. With that, the LVAD for a heart patient obviously becomes a better option. It becomes not a better option than transplant, but at least it's a better option than it once was. And that within itself, from what I've experienced in dealing with people and many of them, the recovery from that, it's a little difficult. It's a little bumpy. Obviously, you're getting the whole chest opened up, and there's a lot involved in that. The healing process is difficult, but when you bounce back from the initial healing process, the outcomes are very good. As a matter of fact, one of my good friends that just happens to live a few miles down the road here, he had an LVAD and he didn't want it, and I advised him not to get it and to fight and try to keep from getting it. And then this was about 6 years ago, or not that far, 4 years ago maybe. But he didn't want it. I advised him not to get it. Well, he ended up having to get it, and he bounced back pretty quickly. As a matter of fact, he wasn't transplanted until over a year later. And I can remember him telling me many times, he said, "Jim, I don't even know if I want a transplant. I feel so good with the LVAD," and it doesn't work for everyone, but for him it did. "And I feel so good with the LVAD, I don't know if I want to go through the transplant. I'm pretty happy with my life like it is." I can even remember one day, my parents live across the street from him. And one day I was over at my parents' house, and I looked out the window, and I saw him, and this was not too long after his LVAD surgery. I saw him slid up under his son's truck working on it. And I thought to myself, oh, lands, he has no business doing that. But then I thought about it, and I thought, wait a minute, if he can do it, he needs to do it. That's the quality of life it gave to him. And I know many people who've had that type of success with it. So the LVAD can restore a good level of quality of life. Is it as good as a transplant? Probably not. It's certainly not as much of a long-term solution, but it's pretty good. So there's the answer to that. And then she asked particularly then about my recovery. What happened?
Mama had me right here.
Okay, let me catch my breath. Sorry about that. With 5 children, ages 18, 14, 6, 4, and 5, there's always a disaster going on behind me, and I don't know what happened. They were arguing with each other a while ago. So, going back to the question now, how long did recovery take for transplant? I'm assuming she's saying for transplant. Maybe I've already answered it. If you're talking about the LVAD, I just answered it. If you're talking about transplant, the actual heart transplant recovery, again, varies person to person. Everybody's got a much different experience from the next. In general, when I'm advising people face-to-face to wrap their mind around recovery, to plan for recovery, I tell them to count on being moderately to fully recovered in about a year. Now, for me, the recovery time was, I claim, somewhere around a year-ish. However, I remember it was at a year when I actually mentally caught myself and thought, hey, you've been feeling good for several months. And I realized that probably around the 8-9 month mark, that's where I actually kind of got back to doing what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until the year that I kind of caught that and realized that that was the case. Now, does that mean that it really takes a year or 9 months or anything like that? No, it doesn't. The initial recovery can probably be done if there's no complications. And a lot of times there are complications, but if there's no complications, the initial recovery can be done within a matter of 6 to 12 weeks. And most of that is where you get to your transplant team where they release you from what they call the sternal precautions, where that sternum is healed enough to where you can go back to, doing some exercise, physical stuff a little bit more. And that's the majority of it is just sternal precautions. And then as far as, getting function back, provided, again, there's no real difficulties, 6 to 12 weeks. And then within that time, over the months, you'll gradually improve and you'll gradually make some progress. At least that's the way it has been for me and a lot of other people. So that's not as in-depth as I've gone before, but that's generally what we're talking about right now. All right. You're okay.